Hi, so Teresa here from Humanitarians, and in this mini course we're going to be talking about how to give and receive feedback and also why it's so important. My experience in humanitarian work and other types of work that I did before humanitarian work has always been in management. And the theme of feedback was always a recurrent one. Before humanitarian work, I was a senior director, I was a business owner, so I managed a lot of people from a very young age. Not always well, obviously. And I was also managed then in other jobs by a lot of other people. So I managed and I was managed, as most of us in life are. I also trained a lot of people in different things, not just in humanitarian work, but also I trained teachers. I trained teachers how to teach, so I had to observe how they were teaching and then in a whole class, for example, and then give them feedback about their teaching skills afterwards, face to face, a bit like our performance reviews. I also had to hire and fire people. When you fire people, you have to tell them why you're firing them as nicely as possible, especially if it's because of their performance or some serious level of incompetence that they have that makes it kind of impossible to work with them, or a personality issue. I've worked with very talented people and I've worked with very difficult people. People that are difficult to work with are usually those who have difficult personalities. I'm not saying I don't have a difficult personality. However, out of hundreds of people that I have worked with and managed, I would say there were only a few that were like impossible to work with. No, mission impossible, basically nothing to be done. Very few. Most people can improve, and I myself have improved. But people who refuse to recognize that they have an issue or a skill deficit and refuse feedback and argue the feedback, usually this is because of a deeper personality issue and is more difficult to deal with. So as I said, as I managed a lot of people, I was also managed by a lot of people. And some of the managers who managed me were better than others. Some managers that I've had throughout my lifetime had a lot of damaging effect on me, I would say. I would say being damaged by a lot of bad managers. I grew up and was trained by the hardest manager of all, my mother. From a very young age, I worked for her. She was extremely critical. She never gave any positive feedback. And it was hard to do anything to her standards, hard to do anything that she would be satisfied with. There was always something wrong, something you didn't do just right. So I grew up hypersensitive to criticism because criticism was all that I had experienced growing up and in my working life. And no, the more you're criticized, you don't get used to it. No. If there is a lot of criticism in your life, in different aspects of your life, not just work, and no or little positive reinforcement, your self-esteem and self-confidence will be very, let's say, rocky. Then after my mother, this kind of negative feedback or critical feedback or absence, I would say more of positive feedback, was reinforced by many more bad managers because my mother wasn't a good manager. She was good at her job, but not a good manager. So I ended up basically at the end of my 20s with no confidence, despite always performing my work to high standards. So why did I have no confidence? Because as I said, when there is only criticism and an absence, especially, of positive reinforcement and validation, that is what happens. You have no confidence. If you're doing work and you don't know if what you're doing is good or bad because nobody tells you anything, either way, how can you possibly develop healthy self-esteem and confidence? And if all you get is criticism, you cannot develop healthy self-esteem and confidence. Good parenting, for example, is balanced, and there must be plenty of positive reinforcement. Also, of course, corrective feedback, but in a gentle way when you're a child. So it is in management, so it is in sport, as we'll see. Also, no feedback at all is almost worse than critical feedback because you don't know. You don't know if you're doing things well and you enter into self-doubt. Positive reinforcement is essential, as we will see through these videos, for motivation on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's essential for increasing a person's performance, a person and a team's performance, right? But there's ways to do it. Just think about the difference in how you feel when someone says something nice about you and how you feel when they say something negative to you. When I was a teenager, I played basketball a lot and other sports, and I was pretty good, and I competed at a pretty high level, but I was never as good as I could be. I didn't reach my true potential. Why not? Because the coaching style of then and now as well was to shout at players. It wasn't to motivate them. It was to shout. So the coaches would shout at you. Shouting and swearing was the method of training, and during a match of anger if you made a mistake or you didn't do something right. If I had had a coach who didn't shout at me in training or in matches, I would have been much more relaxed on the court, less tense and less afraid. And I would have grown as a player. My talent would have flourished, not stagnated, because I would have had confidence. Those coaches diminished my confidence. They didn't build my confidence. When you're 11 years old and a big man is shouting at you all the time, it doesn't feel good. Not just me shouting at the whole team, because that was the way coaching was, and that was the way management was, and still is. As a contrast, just one time, a woman coached me. She never shouted. She was really encouraging, and I played so much better in that team, enjoyed the whole experience much more, and learned more. I grew. My confidence grew a little bit more. Then it was broken down again by those shouting coaches, but still, there was that time, and I remember that time very vividly. She corrected my errors in a gentle way and helped me to improve, told me what I should work on, what I should practice on, and why, and she did it in a way that motivated me to practice and work to improve my basketball skills. Because in basketball, like in any job, there are multiple skills that you have to dribble, you have to shoot, you have to defend, etc. So when there's no fear, you learn. Well, you don't learn when you're tense and afraid. So if only in sport and in management, coaches and managers were like that, encouraging, supportive, and gave key motivational and performance feedback in the right way. There is not enough motivational or performance-driven feedback in humanitarian work in general. If I ever received any feedback, positive feedback, it was usually followed by a but, and was usually given kind of almost reluctantly, like as if the person didn't really want to say something. I even had someone say, I'm not going to give you excellent and everything because that wouldn't be good. There has to be errors, even though you are. It's crazy. So most of the feedback is usually followed by a but. And a but, people only hear the but, right? So if you say something positive and then you say a but, people will hear whatever comes after the but. It erases the positive thing that was said first. For example, hey, John, that report you wrote is great, but it's missing a broader perspective. Albert, you did great work on fixing that tire the other day, but you left all of the tools lying around after you and I had to clear them up. Or, Sarah, thanks for staying late to get the budget in on time, but I had to stay 2 hours later to correct all of your mistakes. So what do you think people hear? Or there's this sandwich, which I hate. That sandwich that was taught for so long. Give positive, then you give negative, then you give negative again. It's rubbish. For example, hey, I think you're very dedicated to your job. I see that, but you're always late. But I love your ideas on the project. The sandwich. What do you hear? You hear you're late. What will people focus on? They'll focus on the negative. I think there's not nearly enough feedback given well enough. I think feedback skills are poor, they're not trained, and people don't prioritize them. People don't know why it's so important to give corrective feedback or motivational feedback in the right way, and they don't work on their skills. I think people are afraid to give corrective feedback, especially in performance reviews, when they're not so useful anyway. They should be given at the right time, not just waiting 6 months or a year to give it in a performance review. They should be given regularly. And especially people are afraid to give feedback to people they're afraid of or who are higher up in the food chain than them. And I think they are, for the most part, we're bad at receiving feedback too. It's not that we're bad at receiving feedback. It's that we're bad at receiving criticism. There's a difference between feedback and criticism. I have seen managers who have been so frustrated with some incompetence of a member of their team for months, and they never tell them. They never corrected it. And then, when it comes to the famous performance review, they give them a brilliant performance review and never mention all of the things that they've been complaining about to other people for months. That doesn't help people to grow. As most things, giving feedback and receiving feedback is a skill that you can and should work on to get better at, because you will see that both your management and your performance will improve hugely if you work at it.